Mac, have you seen this? Have you heard about this?
What's that?
HelloFresh has put out a box that allows you to have the Elf experience.
Oh, boy.
The ultimate Elf meal of all the sugars and maple syrups that you want.
Spaghetti.
To go with your cooked spaghetti.
Okay. All right. I
do
like
you,
that.
Do you want some?
I don't personally. No, I don't think that's going to work for me. Did you get your outfit from that Elf box?
Yes, the HelloFresh had overalls and a sweater. I know that you said you didn't want any, but go ahead and check under your seat.
Oh.
That's a joke. We don't have the budget for that. But we are here at the Alamo Drafthouse, joined by the Community Marketing Manager, East Coast, Alex Shebar. You guys are showing Elf constantly right now, 20th anniversary.
It's Elf season for us, every day, all day. That's not actually true, but lots of screenings. We love Elf here at Alamo Drafthouse.
But I also have found that there are some other Elf products. You have Elf syrup-flavored goldfish, which that doesn't sound bad.
In your HelloFresh box?
No, stop. Get over the HelloFresh, all right? Also, if I wanted to make pasta with all this sugar, I could just make that myself.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that throw a ton of sugar in their red sauce.
Really?
That's a thing. Yeah, that's a thing.
My Nona would not like that.
I bet she puts sugar in her red sauce, just not much.
I've never referred to my grandmother as my Nona, so I apologize to both you guys. I'm being disingenuous
It's
right
real
now.
Across the board today.
I'm nervous to be in this beautiful, beautiful theater. Yes,
Good,
we
you
are
should be.
at
Very
the Alamo
intimidated.
Drafthouse, just opened up down the seaport.
Yes.
And I have been so excited to come here because you guys did work with WBZ News Radio over the summer. We did Free Friday Flicks, and every week it was just, we're gonna open soon. We're gonna open soon, and finally we are here.
I don't understand. It's still February, right? We opened exactly when we said we would. I see no problems.
One goo, three, yeah! Goo. Jaws 3. Goo. King of Queens. Goo. Meryl Streep. Goo. Entertainment.
I'm Goo.
And I'm Mac.
And we're the Mac and Goo program. We bring you friendship.
And today we're adding a third to our friendship.
Yes, once again, Alex Shebar of the Alamo Drafthouse.
I agreed to no friendship. I don't understand where this is coming
When
from.
you agreed to my email, it says at the bottom, very, very fine print, you need to incorporate friendship. And this movie is all about friendship. Actually, you know what? Family.
Family. That's what it really is. Actually, the writer of the movie, David Berenbaum, says it's about a father-son relationship at its core, which I thought about afterwards. I'm like, you know what? It really is. It really
Father-son. So it's his father and him, and then his father, I believe, passed away.
When he
and
was
now
young,
it's him and his sons. And as someone who watches this movie every single year with his mother and now sharing the movie with my 3-year-old son who absolutely loves it, I fully understand that.
Yeah, that's an experience I haven't had yet. So it's interesting to think about, when you first watched this in 2003, we were, 14, 15 maybe? And you have a different experience with that movie then. And now that you're a father, I'm sure you're having a different experience.
Speaking as a father, do you mind if I take the floor and speak as a father real quick? Like, this is a movie, and not to compare it to other ones, but say if you have this and you have Home Alone. I'm not showing my son Home Alone. While I think he'd have fun with it, he also might try and kill me. Whereas this, it's him, he loves when Buddy throws up in the trash can or gets attacked by the raccoon. Silly things like that, not putting Christmas ornaments on the floor for me to then step on.
How many tarantulas do you have in your house? If it's any more than 0, probably don't show him.
Oh, that would be, if he became obsessed with spiders all of a sudden, that would be real bad news for you.
That'd be great for the rodent-filled area that I live in.
So today we are talking about Elf. Elf came out on November 7th, 2003. This movie was made on a budget of $33 million, and it doesn't feel like that at all.
Well, I think the budget actually helps it in the fact that it's so well-paced, and it's well-paced because they had to get all of their shots in there and not waste any time with anything else.
Yeah, for sure. And it ended up grossing a total of $220 million worldwide, 173 domestic. That's a gold mine for a studio right there. We've seen with Jon Favreau, since you make a movie like that makes that much money, you can kind of do whatever you want.
You've also seen since this movie, and it was really in the 10 years after, where there were the push for the live action, let's try and make another Elf movie. Let's try and make another Christmas classic. And while, I have a soft spot, say, for Fred Claus, it's not the same movie. It's not as good.
Big Vince Vaughn fan? Is that what you're
Big Vince Vaughn
every day,
fan.
all day?
It's Vince Vaughn all day, every day. And I think Vince Vaughn, did he have a hand in Favreau getting this job?
He did, yeah. One of the, Alex, I don't know if you've seen the Movies That Made Us series on Netflix.
I've seen parts of it.
One of the episodes is Elf, and
Yes.
they talk about how they get Jon Favreau to sign on to the movie. They had Will Ferrell signed up to be the star, and he was working on Old School at the time. And Vince Vaughn said, "Hey, how about this guy for the director?" Obviously, him and Favreau made Swingers, so that's how they made that connection, which is pretty interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Favreau just for a hot second?
Yeah.
Because what can't that man do? He's like, oh, I'm going to reinvent Christmas. I'll reinvent Disney. I'll reinvent Star Wars. I'll reinvent Marvel. Just across the board, he builds foundations of incredible films. I mean, truly amazing. When you look back on directors that have changed cinema, I don't think he gets enough credit.
Right, and going into this one, he had just directed Made, and that's it. So this was his second movie.
Starring Vince Vaughn.
Right, and then off the back of this, that's when he did take off, and like I think we've talked about this in the past, but like we've done like the Dork Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He is a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just for what he has put into these characters.
For sure, yeah. Well, so let's talk about the nuts and bolts of this movie.
Yeah.
Elf is a PG adventure, comedy, family, fantasy, romance, and I think one of the best.
Are there any more?
Yeah. Can you throw in?
I think one of the best things about the movie is it's not one thing. It's not just a comedy.
And actually,
it's not just an adventure. You know?
Horror-wise, this was New Line Cinema, which of course was known for horror.
Yep.
And they didn't really know what to do with something like this.
They also weren't in a great place in 2002, 2003. So that's why a big reason why they took a chance on this movie. Elf has a runtime of 97 minutes. Again, a huge strength to this movie is its pacing and the fact that it's an hour and a half long.
Yeah, short and sweet.
On Rotten Tomatoes, Roddy T's 86% from the critics, only 79% from the audience. I don't understand that at all.
Who is pulling that? Who is looking at this film and being like, not for me?
Makes no sense
I
whatsoever.
just can't look at that face anymore.
So would the people be giving the review, say, after Will Ferrell had, like, not at the time, but say in like 2010, where people had kind of not soured on him, but they were getting a little sick of him, and they're like, oh, you know what? I don't really care for this one. Because at the time, like, Ferrell wasn't a movie star.
He'd done almost nothing.
Yeah.
It was SNL, Night at the Roxbury.
Austin Powers.
Old-
How
Thank you.
dare you neglect his Austin Powers cameo?
Old School had just come out.
Yeah.
So this was when he was fresh. This was his first starring role, and I think he knocks it out of the park.
Oh, 1,000%. And we'll talk about it in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you ever could have found anyone to do Buddy the Elf the way that Will Ferrell does it, which is what makes the movie. We mentioned him at the top. This movie's written by David Berenbaum, who moved to Hollywood in the early 90s, and this was his first ever IMDb writing credit, first thing that actually sold. And since then, he really hasn't found much success. He wrote the Haunted Mansion movie, which came out, I think, a year after this one.
Oh, I was going to say which one, because there's
older
several.
one.
Yeah, the older one.
He wrote that Tim Allen Zoom movie, which is horrible. It's a terrible movie.
Wait, what?
Tim
Yeah,
Allen
you
is like a
lost me.
superhero in charge of younger superheroes. It's pretty bad.
Wow.
That was like
Something that
lost
I
to
have-
the ages on that one.
2005,
Sounds something that I have
2006.
never heard of.
Yeah, it's
and
not
that's
good.
something that people, if it was any good, would speak highly of, like, oh, you know what was ahead of its time was this Tim Allen superhero movie.
So
I've never heard that before.
What you're looking for is Sky High. That's the
well,
film
yeah,
in that
Sky
sense.
High, Rocketeer,
Hidden
one of
gem.
those ones,
Hidden
yeah.
gem. And since this movie, he really hasn't found any success. Those two titles are the only two titles I thought you guys might know.
Oh.
He is doing the upcoming Frosty the Snowman movie, so I don't know if they're going to do that live action or if they're remaking it with stop motion. That remains to be seen. But the interesting thing about Berenbaum is he grew up Jewish, so obviously didn't celebrate Christmas, but he grew up loving Christmas movies, and he lost his father young around the holiday season, so Christmas meant so much to him that this sort of became his pet project, his baby. So, and speaking to what Goose said earlier, he wrote this movie as a son, so in his eyes, when he wrote this, it meant one thing, and now he's a father and gets to show it to his kids, and it means something completely different to him now,
Nice.
which is great.
Yeah.
Obviously, this movie's directed by Jon Favreau, which we just talked about. After this, he did Zathura, which didn't do much, so a little bit of a gap there. But then obviously,
Give the man a break.
Your unofficial Jumanji sequel. Wonderful as it was.
Then we get Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Cowboys and Aliens, which obviously didn't do well. The movie Chef, which actually, other than the Iron Man movies, well, I guess this is up there too. Chef is one of the most underrated movies that's come out in the last decade. I love that movie. He did the Jungle Book remake and the Lion King remake, which I don't know. I didn't love either of those movies, but
Jungle
good
Book
enough.
carrot sign facing over the Lion King, I would say.
But they kicked off Disney live action.
Yeah.
Again, it was a gigantic change in Disney's strategy.
For sure. And I wonder, he's just kind of, I think he can do whatever he wants at Disney now, especially obviously talking about The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, which he was the writer or the creator on both of those shows. He had a love growing up for the Christmas classics by Rankin Bass. And so when he got hired for this movie, his big thing was wanting this movie to feel timeless and feel like those Rankin Bass original stop-motion movies.
That's great.
And I feel like over time, that has just proven itself even more, where I do think this movie has gotten better with each year. And since then, since 2003, I don't think... Don't you dare laugh at me.
I hate when you do that.
I don't think that we have had a Christmas... Well, I think we've had one Christmas classic since.
Ooh, I'm excited to know what you think.
Close.
I was going to talk Klaus, actually.
Close.
That was mine as well.
I think Close, although it does get a little silly at points, I think is the best Christmas movie that we've gotten since Elf.
I haven't
Maybe
seen it.
the only... Oh, it's wonderful.
It is.
It'll
so
tug
good.
all
That
the
good,
strings of
really?
all
Yes.
your hearts.
Animated,
How many you
right?
got?
Animated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Jason
it's a-
Schwartzman, J.K. Simmons.
It's a cool animation, too.
Yeah, it's almost like old school hand drawn, but with sort of a modern feel. So it doesn't feel. It feels like a storybook come to life.
Right, okay.
And it's this great story about a postman, and you're just like, this is what I'm watching. Scandinavian town about a postman and a toy
Yeah.
maker, and it is so good start to
Really?
finish.
All right. I'm going to have to put that on
Norm
the list then.
Macdonald also in there.
Really?
Yeah.
Love that. All
There's a
right.
fisherman or a sailor. I'm not sure what he's up to.
Well,
but
lock that in for me. I'll watch
Okay.
that this week.
Might be on Netflix.
It is.
Okay.
Oh, that's good to know. It's a good recommendation for the folks. Elf, let's get to the synopsis. Raised as an oversized elf, Buddy travels from the North Pole to New York City to meet his biological father, who doesn't know he exists and is in desperate need of some Christmas spirit.
Simple fish out of
all?
water.
Yep. It works. It works really, really well. And speaking of that Rankin Bass stuff, that first 20 minutes, 15 minutes when he's on the North Pole, I love the look of that because he's so gigantic. And Favreau also didn't want to use CGI, so it's a lot of practical effects with the stop motion. And they used what's the technique? Forced perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They use in there, which works so well.
Yeah, also, I believe they had a lot of red flags from the studio because they're like, are you borrowing this or are you stealing it? Because the costume is the same costume that the elf
Right.
manager wears in Rudolph.
Yes.
All right, this movie stars. We'll talk about the stars, and then we'll talk about the supporting cast. Looking through this, honestly, one of the greatest supporting casts there's ever been in a holiday movie like this, especially a lower budget with all the names you see here. You have Will Ferrell, obviously, as Buddy the Elf. James Caan as Walter Hobbs, who plays this so straight, and that's honestly what makes that relationship work so well.
There's a scene with Caan because he was instructed never to break. He wanted to be grumpy the entire time. But when Buddy's getting his blood test done and screaming, you can see him covering his mouth and moving because he couldn't keep it together. So that's the only scene where you'll see him going, he loses the stone face. He turns away from the camera because he just lost it. But beyond that, he's perfect as this sour, need of Christmas cheer sort of father figure. There
That was also the scene where I was like, you know what? Buddy the Elf is my 3-year-old son. I now, this has now hit me because he was just eating the cotton balls. And wouldn't listen to simple instruction to the point of now I fully understand a father-son. And also, I think it also plays a bit like how Michael Caine is in A Muppet Christmas Carol, where
classic.
It's this stoic actor who is playing it as if he is in a Shakespearean play.
Right.
It doesn't matter what's going on around him. It doesn't matter if he's acting with puppets. He is going to act it a certain way, and James Caan does that here.
And as much as you're rooting for Buddy the Elf, you're almost rooting more for the switch in Walter Hobbs. It really gives you something more to root for in this movie. Zooey Deschanel is Jovi. And this was really her first big role. She was in Almost Famous, but more of a bit
Very
player
supporting,
there. But she was not the first choice for the studio.
Oh, do tell.
Yes, the studio wanted Katie Holmes because she was a star.
I'm trying to see if I can see it. I don't think I can.
No.
I don't think it's the right choice.
I don't know if she could have given off the charm that Zooey Deschanel has in this movie because she's almost too well known at that point to play that role.
Also, the studio wanted that character to be a prostitute.
Oh. Why?
A lady of the night.
Yes, and And the writers were like, you know that we're trying to make a family-friendly movie. I feel like this might play with that.
You know, the one guy in the back was just like, how about we make her a prostitute?
Hey, guys, I don't know if you've thought about this yet. A hooker? Maybe?
Yeah, pipe down. Save that for another one. Bob Newhart as Papa Elf.
Fantastic.
Awesome. He's so good.
Absolutely
so good
wonderful.
in this. Ed Asner is Santa.
Also.
Santa.
Good old Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
Mac D is back. Yes.
I've been watching a lot of Fargo. I feel like you just hit the Minnesota accent right there. Oh, Santa.
Santa Claus.
Yes.
Mary Steenburgen as Emily Hobbs is great as the foil for Walter Hobbs. Faison Love as the Gimbals manager, and there's a great tidbit about this casting in that Netflix show. They wanted Wanda Sykes super bad in that role.
I can see.
And knowing that she would have been great. However, Faison was great. But if you notice, if you rewatch it again, his name tag even says Wanda on it.
That's phenomenal.
It's pretty good. It's a nice little Easter egg right there. Peter Dinklage as Miles Finch, also phenomenal. Amy Sedaris as Deb. She's Walter's secretary.
Yes.
She's great. Michael Lerner is Fulton. You might not know who Michael Lerner is, but when you see his face, you'll recognize who he is. Andy Richter is Morris. Kyle Gass is Eugene, of course, of Tenacious D fame. Artie Lang as Gimbal Santa is unbelievable.
Yeah, and actually there's a funny joke in the Honest trailer for this of Andy Richter, Kyle Gass, Artie Lang. It just says sidekicks.
Yeah. You've just assembled basically every character actor from the 2000s in that film. It's like, oh, yeah, I know that person from something. Yeah. That's the entire list right there.
There's also a nice little casting of the kid from A Christmas Story who plays one of the elves while Bud is on the North Pole there.
It's cute.
So, Goo, we have talked about this movie a couple times here. So, Alex, we used to do, because we've sort of run out of years and movies to do,
we need to stop.
This Vault series.
It's what the crowd keeps saying, too. They're screaming outside. It's a lot.
We used to go back to a certain year and then talk about the best movies and worst movies of the year. And at the end, nominate 4, have people vote on it on Twitter or X now. And this was one of our
Elon thanks you.
This was one of our final 4 for the 2003 Vault. The other 3 were Old School, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and Finding Nemo. This came in second to Old School, which as much, Old School might define 2003 more, but this is way more timeless than Old School.
Timeless, yes,
no
but
question.
I mean, thinking back to 2003, that's all anybody quoted for probably until the 40-year-old virgin. Actually, no, until Anchorman came out, I think everyone only just quoted Old School.
Yeah, so
constantly.
I'm okay with that because Old School is definitely more that era, but I would rather watch Elf 10 times more.
Well, now
Absolutely.
maybe, yeah.
We also talked about this. We did a Christmas movie vault. Talked about all the Christmas movies. Our final 4 for that were Elf, Home Alone, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and The Night Before Christmas. Now, that was more our
Nightmare
taste.
Before Christmas.
Oh, yeah, The Nightmare Before Christmas, sorry. That was more our taste playing into it. It's a Wonderful Life probably should have been nominated. People would mention Die Hard. I argue it's not a Christmas movie. Where do you stand on that?
It's obviously a Christmas film.
It's set at a Christmas party. It really
is set at a Christmas party. Sure.
It can't be any more obvious.
Bad Santa, I think, is in the discussion. A Christmas Carol in the discussion as well. But Elf actually won that vote over Home Alone, which is my favorite, 2 favorites come Christmas time. And some of the online rankings you go and look at, I just had to bring this up because it bothered me. Vulture ranked Elf the 28th best Christmas movie of all time.
Pure insanity.
I think you could argue 4, 5, 6, or 7 movies over it.
I'm not even sure I can name 27 other Christmas films. So.
I have no idea how you justify.
There's at least 27 Rudolph movies. Shiny New Year, the July one.
Oh yeah,
the one where he meets. The Shiny New Year 2.
Is Heat Miser, Cold Miser a Rudolph film? That's one.
Year Without a Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah.
Just about every other publication has a top 5, and I think most people you would speak to would have it in their top 4 or 5. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to argue the older stuff, which I understand, I think the pacing on the older stuff doesn't help it out. This is the one. I like this Home Alone. And while Home Alone 2 doesn't have that same feel as Home Alone 1, the murder house at the end might be my favorite Christmas thing ever.
It does have 100% more Donald Trump. So
it does.
If you're into that, you go right ahead.
Goo, this is a point you brought up that I think is interesting to talk about. In consideration, I think the original person they wanted for this role was Chris Farley, and obviously it's of the era of Jim Carrey, too. Would this movie have been better or worse with those 2 castings?
So with Farley, it's a completely different movie, and I feel like, and obviously we don't know because we've never seen a cut with it, but we've also seen some of the stuff of Farley playing Shrek, and that's completely different than what Mike Myers is.
Yes.
to the point of like, I don't know if he could have had the childlike wonderment and the sincerity that Will Ferrell had here. So although it would have been maybe a movie that we remember, I don't think it would have been a timeless classic.
You've hit the right word there, which is the wonder. Because it's easy to see why they would have picked Farley or Jim Carrey, because they're looking for adult children.
Right.
They're looking for people who can, throw a tantrum or, feel larger than life at the same time as like a 3-year-old feels larger than life, because it's so much energy and power. But neither of them has the innocence or the wonder or the sweetness that Will Ferrell brings.
The word I keep coming back to is like this wholesomeness.
Wholesomeness, that's a beautiful word.
Which I don't think the other two have, and Will Ferrell has to the max.
Well, I think Farley kind of had it, but you needed a sidekick with him, like a
David Spade.
Chris Spade, like David Spade, who can like poke at him and like get him to that point. I'm not sure, because when Farley was off on his own, those movies didn't really have that same feel.
Yeah. Plus, did you know, I don't know if you know this fact, this is not Will Ferrell's first adventure with Christmas. Before he was famous, he was a mall Santa, and his elf was Chris Caan.
Oh, that's too perfect.
As they were both coming up in the ranks. And
that's so funny.
They've told many stories about it, and I was just like, nah,
that is great.
Incredible.
Oh, that's awesome.
So the rumor with Jim Carrey not doing it, and I've only seen that one online because the Chris Farley stuff is in the Netflix special. But the stuff with Jim Carrey is that he was doing The Grinch and he didn't want to do back-to-back Christmas things.
See, now that's a classic Christmas movie.
Yep.
But that one's insane.
But that one's insane, and that one's a bit more crass.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it worked out for him. That movie did well, too.
Yeah.
After the success of Old School, which I think was in the early part of 2003,
yes,
New Line looked at this movie and was like, oh boy, we got to capitalize on the Frank the Tank, and didn't want the wholesome Will Ferrell. They wanted Frank the Tank. So they had actually taken the movie away from Favreau and re-edited it and tried to make that PG-13/R-rated comedy, and they couldn't do it. The footage wasn't there. So
they're like, we didn't shoot that movie. you can try. You can't edit something that isn't there.
We're just adding in swear bleeps at random times. They're like, look at his mouth.
They were actually adding in footage from Old School, just putting it in there.
Digitally edited Santa hat, just like on him running through the streets. I'm like, look, it's Elf. We nailed it.
I didn't know Luke Wilson was in this movie. Jeremy Piven.
So after they cast Ferrell, their next role was Walter that they wanted to cast. Originally, they wanted Gary Shandling, which would have been interesting because I don't know. He could have been as mean, but not as serious as Caan plays it.
But I think that Shandling actually could have pulled off the supporting role.
He could have.
Not as important as the main role as Buddy the Elf. And I think that Shandling could have had that hatred and anger towards Buddy.
But I'll tell you, when I was young and I saw this film, like, Caan scared me.
Oh,
like,
Caan,
so,
sure.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe flashbacks to my own father, which we're not getting into on this podcast. But like,
that's actually why you're here.
Oh, great! This is therapy. Wonderful. I had no idea. But like, I remember being like, I don't know if Gary Shandling, if I ever looked at that man and been like, that's an intimidating guy.
100% right. About
well, the cast and crew was also very afraid of James Caan.
Sure, I mean, he's James Caan. I would be afraid of him.
We also, I don't know, a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, we did a top 10 Will Ferrell characters.
Yes.
We had Buddy the Elf ranked number 2 behind Ron Burgundy, which I think is
that's
fair.
an absolute fair ranking.
So getting back to your point, Goo, has there been a Christmas classic since this movie?
So they tried with Violent Night, and while I appreciate Violent Night, I think that's a fun movie. I don't even consider it a Christmas movie.
No. I mean, after, Bad Santa is maybe the only film I can think of that sort of bridged that gap of like adult Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Let's take out all the sweetness and wonder and childhood fun and we'll just make it like crass and violent and angry. And there have been ones that I've enjoyed, but they're not classics. They're just kind of there for the moment to be like, oh, this is Krampus, a movie about Krampus. And you're like, great.
That was the tag on the movie.
Nailed it. You did it in one. So, and Bad Santa even works only because of Billy Bob Thornton.
Yes.
Like anyone else, you'd be like, what are we watching here?
Right.
So I don't have it. Klaus was my answer. You asked me this question earlier. That's the one I was bringing. You stole it from me. Thanks. That's great.
I'm sorry. That was a movie. I think my son was like 1 at the time. And I'm like, oh, an animated movie. Let me put this on for you. And then I'm sitting there watching like, get out of the way. This is fantastic.
It truly is.
2003, by the way, you get Bad Santa as well, and also Love Actually.
Yeah,
a great
same year
for a Christmas movie special there. I have heard that the new Paul Giamatti movie, The Holdovers, is almost an instant Christmas classic.
Now, it's interesting.
But obviously for an older crowd.
It is set at Christmas. It's wonderful.
So you've seen it.
I've seen it.
We haven't seen it yet.
It's fantastic.
Okay.
Giamatti is best. Giamatti's one of these actors that, like, everything you see him in, he's fantastic.
Yep.
And then you forget him out immediately. You're just like, why are you not in more movies? What are you doing, Paul Giamatti? Like, yes. It's very sad. And it's kind of got that Dead Poets thing going for it,
gotcha.
where like it's inspirational and it's all about obviously a prep school and there's connections made and people grow as characters, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not like a super cheerful, fun movie.
Okay.
I wouldn't throw it on with like a hot cocoa and be like, this is my entertainment for the evening.
So there's not a ton of like rewatchability to it, I guess is what you're saying.
Do you like how much do you want to like be sad? Like,
yeah,
do you
I
like?
love it.
Right.
I love it. I love being sad.
Then yeah, you'll enjoy it very much. It is a fantastic film. I'm just not sure I'll watch it again next year.
Oh hi, it's Goo from the Mac and Goo Movie Club. If you like what you just saw, you can find full episodes of our program on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, CastBox, iHeartRadio, or wherever podcasts are found. And now it's time for girls jumping on trampolines.